nobody's perfect. It's a well-known phrase that we all like to trot out when we're excusing our faults. And it's true, of course. Perfection, well, that's really reserved for God. Yet we still, bizarrely, expect something approaching it from the great among us. Our media, on our behalf, are especially fond of slinging mud at those in the public eye. But if somebody dares to retaliate, it rarely ends well. For them. This is, of course, how things have been since time immemorial. Our species loves to put its heroes on pedestals, only to savour the more monumental crashes of their headlong falls. Human social arrangements, our interwoven lives, are often complicated. Consider, for example, certain senior government figures. Human relationships are by no means simple or straightforward. They may start out well and then turn sour, or sometimes the reverse. They may be open to external pressures or adverse circumstances. The effects on behaviour may be positive or negative, as it seems was the case for heroic Israelite underdog David. However good his heart, his Achilles heel repeatedly seems to have been his close personal relationships. His first wife, Michal, was the daughter of his kingly predecessor, Saul. The union represented a useful alliance politically, yet it was one which was probably ill-starred right from the outset. I should have known better. If my scheming father offered me as a prize to his handsome young rival, well, that didn't bode well. But I was smitten. He was handsome and dynamic, and I guess I was flattered that the man of my dreams would even entertain the challenge Pa set. Suppose he thought Dave would come to harm with all those Philistines to fight. But there we are. He didn't. And I was glad. But if there's a problem with the in-laws, it's an ephah to a shekel that the whole thing will be doomed from the word go. There wasn't a problem with all the in-laws, of course. David was as thick as thieves with my brother Jonathan, joined at the hip, practically. Bromance. Relations with his own older brothers were iffy, perhaps that's why. And a friend at court, since Pa fell into loathing Davy so quickly, well, Johnny was a solid insurance policy against those violent tempers, though the two of them being close seemed to rile Pa even more. The relationship between Pa and Davy, well, was hardly normal. A high point was Pa actually kidnapping me and forcing me to marry someone else and move away. I know, sounds crazy, but anything to spite David because God was clearly with him, whereas he ditched King Saul good and proper. Papa had become so very paranoid and constantly plotted to rid himself of the pretender. The rumours were widespread about old man Samuel anointing David as future king, and David told me how Pa tried repeatedly to murder him, and Davy, well, he could easily have turned the tables time after time, but he respected the king, the anointed one, even then. Saul the Great. Seems he had been reckoning without God, what God wanted. Underneath it all, that was the root of his failure. We never had a minute's peace during Pa's reign. Our religion being so different from our neighbours was the thing. We were a breed apart from Amalek and Philistia, with their hordes of utterly bloodthirsty, so-called gods. Unless we capitulated, changed our ways, they'd never let us be. And that explains how we came to be fighting battles on two fronts at once, which is how all the significant men in my life were in combat at the same time, but not in the same place. My husband, he was campaigning against the Amalekites, while Pa and my older brothers, including the bestie, were up against the beastly Philistines again. Things went well with Dave, just the opposite for the family firm. David comes home in triumph, only to receive the horrific news about Pa and Johnny, Ab and Malk's fate. Their bodies displayed as trophies and hacked about by the fillies. Well, you might have thought that David would be relieved, Johnny apart. His bitter, determined enemy was no more. Say what you like about him, David was so heartbroken that he wrote the most beautiful lament. How are the mighty fallen, he said, according Pa, more dignity than he probably deserved. Of course, I didn't get to hear the whole thing till much later, remember? Not until my youngest brother, Ishi, finally had me return to David. Talk about pass the parcel. King's sons, they were just the job in battle and to ensure succession. But daughters were nothing more than bargaining chips about as valuable as goats or donkeys. Just imagine my joy, though. The national superhero, after everything that had happened, my precious David actually wanted me back. I was important to him. After all, maybe a little, or maybe it was just the family name. But to be honest, I felt like a consolation prize, and a poor one at that. The faintest reminder of his precious Johnny. It wasn't enough. There had been 3 of us in our marriage, and reinforcements were coming soon. If you don't love the wife you have, just grab a couple of alternatives. If I'd produced children, well, perhaps it would have been different. A tribe of little Jonathans. If God was with David on the battlefield, in the royal court, even when Pa was out for his blood, from the word go, he was not in our marriage. It was hopeless. David was a good man at heart, a hero, eloquent, musical, resilient, respected, respectful. But as I found, to my cost, really not ideal husband material. Poor Michal. Yet, for all David's iffy interpersonal relationships, he was still material with which God could work, while his behaviour sometimes left much to be desired. The lyre-playing poet in him was more than open to the God of his ancestors. He would still, after all the fierce hand-to-hand combat and arduous internal power struggles, be a successful shepherd and protector to this needy and threatened people. Now, obviously, we love the story of the giant killer. It's a nostalgic remnant of our childhood sometimes. It gives us hope when we're feeling totally out of our depths. But perhaps it's King David's imperfections which should encourage us more. None of us is perfect, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are not material with which God can work in the building of his kingdom of love, even if we are really useless with a catapult